Good morning. How's everyone doing? We're excited to be here this morning to chat about a topic that's sort of near and dear to me as a former marketer turned journalist who worked on so many B2B campaigns and developer-focused campaigns. So we've got Khalid here from Stack Overflow to kind of give us some insight into how to really connect with a community that is a bit hard to reach and expect something really special from their marketing experience. And so I think where I kind of want to start the conversation is to just get a lay of the land in terms of, developers and the tech community and how, we're here to talk really about tech at Web Summit, and there's 73,000 of us here. So that's a perfect example of sort of this new economy where there's really a proliferation of your target audience. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we're entering a world, well, first off, Stack Overflow, stackoverflow.com. Who in here writes code? Raise your hand. Not very many of you. So my point was going to be that the developer profile is shifting. Everyone is going to be a developer to some extent in the future, at least we believe that. And I see that on the marketing team. So for example, when I was working at an agency 10 years ago or so, there were graphic designers which were sort of siloed in graphic designers. Today, the designers on my team build the website, design the website, they do it all. They have a developer background. And I think we're moving into a world in which code, whether it's through low code, no code, or this sort of need to make yourself marketable,
which is a digitally focused agency, and really there's a proliferation of those kinds of agencies in the space, and that's what the focus is right now.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that to be true. We're seeing the sort of, we run this survey every year. We're about 100,000 people, called the Stack Overflow survey. 100,000 people who write code tell us about their experience, their profile, et cetera. And we're seeing the profile of the coder the first time when people learn to code shifting down to age 11 to 17, depending on the country in which people are based. And we believe some of the countries that are investing really early in development education are going to lead the future.
Yep.
And so I think that that's super important. The other thing that's happened is in the pandemic over the past few years, a lot of people recognize that their industries, whether it was hospitality or something that was hit really hard by the pandemic, they needed to make themselves more competitive, more well-rounded, and so they took to online resources, whether it was a Udemy or a Pluralsight or a resource like Stack Overflow, to augment the skills they already had.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think that anyone in the audience who has ever marketed to a B2B audience knows that it's really hard. It's a niche audience. You have to understand it. You have to understand the complexities of the audience. And as I mentioned, wishing that I personally knew how to code, I think about how that knowledge could help me as a marketer to empathize with the target audience. Because I think in B2C, all of us are consumers, and we can all sort of put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who shops at Lululemon or Starbucks or something like that, because most of us have. It's a bit harder when you are trying to connect with devs and you've never been in their shoes. So give me a sense of how you think about that at Stack Overflow in terms of reaching that audience. What really connects with them, and how do you plan and strategize in terms of how to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started as CMO of Stack Overflow 4.5 years ago, and I learned a lot of hard lessons. when I first started. I had an agency background. I had managed developers in the past. I had many friends who were developers, but I hadn't so directly marketed to them. And 4.5 years ago, we had a blog, and it was the era of the listicle. So a lot of pithy content, fun headlines, things like that. And what I learned is that marketers often shy away from 3,000 words, super dry, technical blog posts, when in fact on Stack Overflow's blog, which reaches 400,000 people a month, and our newsletter reaches 2.1 million a week, that's the most popular. They want to know how we're building things, where we're messing up, if there is some sort of security issue, how we're addressing it and making the site better, and they want us to go into as much technical depth as possible. So that's one example. The other is, I worked at WPP. I did like fun ads that you've all seen on subways and Super Bowl commercials. And so, like many marketers, spent time ideating on whiteboards around fonts and colors and creative. And on StackOverflow.com, what we've seen when promoting our own products is the more stripped down something is, no proprietary fonts, no colors, certainly no animations, the more it resonates with the developer, because they have a job to do, they want information, they want transparency and authenticity, and all of the bells and whistles are just going to slow them down.
Yeah, so the flashy stuff doesn't resonate. So there are some logistical issues that this inevitably poses for a marketing org. I've been there, and I've been in a situation where it's like, okay, you want to write these technical blog posts at scale, and it requires that level of knowledge. It requires relationships with subject matter experts within the organization, sometimes outside of the organization. It takes a lot of time and money. So talk me through how you possibly do that, and how you actually create enough content to engage such a large community.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's been really interesting about the last few years is the great resignation, so people leaving their jobs, and two, how people have left sort of major cities and spread all over the world. And so what we've been able to do at Stack Overflow is, again, we have this huge blog, this podcast, this newsletter, but quite a small bench of writers in-house. What we've done is built out a bench of freelancers and permalancers, super interesting people with deep technical backgrounds who have maybe left their jobs over the past couple of years to start something that's super remote, their own consultancy or similar. And I think that we're entering an era, certainly economically, where people, marketers in particular, are going to have to be quite frugal and really invest surgically. Sure. And so building up this bench of freelancers, to me, is like the number one way to do that. So who do you know who can write about Web3 in a very sophisticated way? Blockchain, AI, ML, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have a process for engaging the community itself to come in and sort of be thought leaders and write that content?
Absolutely. So we have a call for submissions, and that's how we met a lot of the people who write for our blog today.
Yeah, it's sort of a different definition of influencer marketing, but it strikes me that it would be very effective because it builds trust. You're hearing how to do something from your peers, and it creates this real notion of, okay, we're in it together. I can rely on someone else in the Stack Overflow community to show me how, tell me how. And so it strikes me that that would be very effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that hits a point that's like, if you walk away with one thing from this talk, and I've talked to so many entrepreneurs and technical marketers and everyone else over the past few days at this conference, is we always talk about community being our competitive moat at Stack Overflow. And I think that it is incumbent on marketing leaders to push their CEO, their board, their CFO, their investors, whatever, to understand that community is really a competitive differentiator. And so I know there have been many talks, and will continue to be coffee conversations about the future of Web3 and crypto and everything else. But the one thing that industry, or they've done a number of things well, but the one thing they've done extraordinarily well is investing in communities and really getting people to evangelize their products. And I think that regardless of what the financials look like, near term, medium term, that investment in community is going to continue to pay dividends. Even on Stack Overflow, we've seen questions and answers around blockchain increase 80% year over year, more than anything else, more than cloud migration, which is up 50% year over year. And so this notion of really building community is critical to the longevity of a brand, and the concept of building community is incumbent on building and maintaining trust.
Sure. So trust is an interesting word, I think, in the context of everything that's sort of unraveling today on social media. And I feel like this has come up in so many talks, but it's very important for your audience to think about online communities, Twitter being one of those. So can you give me a sense of, what the outlook is first for Twitter in the wake of the Elon Musk stuff, and then for social strategy in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know what I don't know. I don't think any of us do. Everyone's still asleep in America. Let's see what happens with Twitter. So I think the thing about communities is that everyone feels a piece of ownership of it, right? Like, we know that at Stack Overflow, people literally built it, this knowledge repository, since 2008 over the last 14 years. People certainly feel that way about Twitter. They feel a piece of ownership about it. They have a lot of content there. They've gotten jobs there, made connections there. And so, I hope that Elon and whatever the new leadership team looks like continue to sort of take a community-first mindset. I think the big question for marketers and advertisers is the focus going to be on the user or the advertiser? How binary is that going to be? And how are their products going to bridge that gap?
Sure. And where are some of the other platforms that you think your community lives? There's a lot of discussion right now in the space about emerging social platforms like TikTok, for example. Imagine trying to connect with a Gen Z developer, up-and-coming developer. Do you go to one of those?
Yeah, I mean, Neil's talk was super interesting, and I need to email the person he said to get the slide deck. I think that, the first thing that I always say to marketers when they ask a question like that is, who is your persona? For us, it's everyone who codes. It's every developer and technologist. And to your point, one thing we're really focused on is ensuring that we're an enduring institution by bringing along the next generation of technologists. And so I think for us, it's paramount that we continue to invest in TikTok, that we have a presence on TikTok. We share a lot of memes on Twitter because it's successful. But we also want to reach senior engineering leaders, CIOs, CTOs. And so we do have a presence, a pretty robust presence on LinkedIn. And so, I think that it's sort of a cop-out answer, but I think you have to be everywhere. You have to be everywhere, but you have to constantly reevaluate where it really makes sense to invest. So one example is, like, about a year ago, we saw engagement on Facebook really dipping down, and that's because they lost a lot of trust of the community, especially the technical community, and so our investment in Facebook changed. But we have a big presence we still post there organically, we're just not doing as much paid. And I think we'll see what happens on Twitter. We're always looking at Reddit also, where we have a big presence. And so we're sort of figuring out how we evolve in real time.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about sort of the cautionary element of leaning into the flashy, leaning into the simple, and how really being able to get technical can make a difference. Can you give me an example of a time when you leaned into the more flashy kind of an ad and it didn't work?
Sure. I mean, there's like the classic example of just going too heavy on the creative, doing something that was just a little too glam for a technical audience. I think, a couple of lessons that we learned as we evolved we have a suite of advertising products, just given we're such a high trafficked website. And we did experiment with programmatic at one point. And it was a little bit antithetical to how we started out with no video ads, ensuring that all of our advertisements were technical in nature. And so if there were 1,000 ads that sort of met our criteria, but one snuck through that was horoscope focused, astrology focused, or for a dating site, people would be in an uproar. And what we realized was that, one, it wasn't worth the headache, and two, we had to have a much more thorough communications cascade. We had to bring the community along incrementally, get feedback constantly, and I think a lot of companies learn this the hard way. When there's a big uproar in the community. And so we invest really heavily in communications, internally and externally. And I think that's a really important point also. Our CEO does a quarterly blog post, our CPO and CTO will engage with the community directly, but internally, because some of our biggest champions within the community work at Stack Overflow, we do a monthly AMA. We focus group all of our ads with our engineers, and I think that it's actually a lot of marketers take for granted that some of your best market research can be done for free in a conference room.
Totally, and what you're describing, I think, is going to resonate with anyone who's ever been on the internet, because all of us have had the experience of going to a website and getting bombarded with display ads that are not quite right. And I think it's very fascinating to look at the developer community as like a subset of that, a developer community that is, technically oriented and really understands why this is happening and that it's the wrong message.
Yeah, I think a couple of things there is like, we always say that sometimes the tag data on stackoverflow.com is prescient, can predict the future. Like we saw when everyone went into lockdown in March of 2020, cloud migration surged. Everyone was like, how do you stand up a VPN? How do you migrate to the cloud? Because everyone went remote. And those 3 months, we saw as much traffic in cloud migration as we saw in 4.5 years. And to some extent, developers on Stack Overflow have predicted the future of advertising, in that they have ad blockers on at a much higher rate than the general population because they're pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
And they have an aversion to cookies in a way that the whole world probably will in a couple of years, especially as the regulatory environment changes. And so we always talk about contextual advertising. How do we prepare for that future? And I think a lot of B2C brands are really going to be scrambling in 10, 11 months.
Sure. So it sounds like what this means probably is that organic matters a lot. I think that, you talked about leaning away from the flashy, more traditional creative, but at the same time, I imagine that the developer community is sometimes up to engage in a fun or unique way. I just did a cover story for AdWeek, the publication that I work for, about Wendy's recent partnership with Adult Swim and how they've done some really cool experiential activations, mostly leaning into organic in order to amplify those. How have you leaned into the concept of experiential or maybe something fun?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, the Wendy's Adult Swim partnership is great. No one does social media like fast food in the US. I think one great example is like we lean into memes, because developers are humans too. And I think sometimes people take for granted how powerful sharing a meme can be. And so a couple of April Fool's Days ago, we took this popular meme, which is that on stackoverflow.com, all people do is copy and paste, which is not true, but it is the broader perception. And so we said, we're putting Stack Overflow behind a paywall so long as you buy this copy and paste Control-CV keyboard. And people thought it was very funny, very charming, but what we actually did is we created a partnership with Drop, which is a mechanical keyboard company big in the developer community. We produced 10,000 units and we sold out in 24 hours. All of the proceeds went to a charity, and now we're on version 3 of that same keyboard. We produced something like 50,000 units, sold nearly all of them, and it's really delighted the community in a way that Wendy's has through some of these things.
Yeah, that's astounding and amazing results. So we have just about a minute left, and I want to switch gears and just ask a quick question about hiring. And when you look to bring folks into your marketing org, what are some of the skill sets that you look for, and can it be taught? Can a marketer who maybe doesn't have a tech background come in and actually learn how to connect with the audience?
I would say 3 things in 30 seconds. One is empathy for developers. You don't have to know how to code, but you have to at least respect the job and the future of coding and what it will dictate in terms of the future. 2 is agility, and I think that's true of anyone working in marketing in the past couple of years and the couple of years that we have facing ahead. And then the third is just like a lot of curiosity, looking for external perspective and really wanting to learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Khalid. This has been fabulous, and thanks everyone for tuning in.